You ever wonder what it feels like to watch your country being sold from the inside? To see men in expensive suits walking through government halls, carrying briefcases full of cash, buying loyalty like groceries at a market? Imagine waking up one morning in Tehran, turning on the radio, and hearing that your democratically elected prime minister has been removed, not by vote, not by the people, but by foreign intelligence services operating in the shadows of your own capital. The smell of tear gas, mixing with the scent of fresh bread from street vendors, the sound of military boots on ancient Persian stones, the feeling in your gut that something fundamental just changed, that the world you knew yesterday is gone forever. This isn't fiction. This isn't a spy novel. This is Operation Ajax, and it's the story of how the CIA and MI6 collaborated to execute the first successful regime change operation of the Cold War era, setting a template that would be used dozens of times in the following decades. And the most disturbing part? The people of Iran had no idea it was happening until it was already over. They thought they were witnessing an internal political crisis, a natural evolution of their democracy. They had no way of knowing that every protest, every headline, every political speech had been carefully orchestrated from offices in London and Washington. By the time the truth came out, declassified 50 years later in 2013, the damage was irreversible. The operation that seemed like a triumph in 1953 became the seed of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, proving that sometimes the most successful operations create the worst long-term consequences. Today, we're going to walk through every phase of this operation, from the initial British pressure on Washington to the final moments when Mohammad Mossadegh was arrested in his own home. And I need you to understand something before we start. This isn't about taking sides. This is about understanding how power actually works when governments decide that democracy is inconvenient. Let's begin with the man who became the target. Mohammad Mossadegh wasn't some radical revolutionary when he became Prime Minister of Iran in 1951. He was 69 years old, educated in Switzerland, from an aristocratic Persian family. His political career spanned decades. He had served in various government positions since the 1920s. But what made him dangerous, what put him in the crosshairs of Western intelligence, wasn't extremism, it was nationalism. Specifically, his unwavering commitment to nationalizing Iran's oil industry, which had been controlled by the Anglo-Iranian oil company since 1901. To understand why this mattered so much, you need to understand the context. Iran's oil was discovered in 1908, and for over 4 decades, the British had extracted enormous wealth from Iranian soil while paying Iran a fraction of the profits. By 1951, the Anglo-Iranian oil company was paying more in taxes to the British government than it was paying in royalties to Iran. The Iranian people could see tankers leaving their ports loaded with their national resource, generating billions in revenue, while their country remained poor. Mossadegh represented a growing movement in Iran that said this arrangement was unacceptable. When he was elected prime minister in April 1951 with massive popular support, one of his first acts was to nationalize the oil industry. The British response was immediate and severe. They organized an international boycott of Iranian oil. They froze Iranian assets in British banks. They imposed a naval blockade to prevent Iran from exporting oil to other countries. The British government, led by Prime Minister Clement Attlee and later Winston Churchill, began planning a coup almost immediately. Initially, they approached President Harry Truman, but Truman refused to participate. The Americans at that time still believed in supporting nationalist movements against colonial powers. But when Dwight Eisenhower became president in January 1953, everything changed. Eisenhower was much more susceptible to the argument that Mossadegh represented a communist threat. The British intelligence services, MI6 specifically, reframed the issue brilliantly. They stopped talking about oil and started talking about the Tudeh Party, Iran's communist party. They provided intelligence, some of it fabricated or exaggerated, suggesting that Mossadegh was losing control and that Iran was about to fall into the Soviet sphere of influence. This was the Cold War. The fear of Soviet expansion was very real in Washington. And so Eisenhower authorized what the British had been requesting for 2 years, a joint operation to remove Mossadegh from power. The target wasn't just a politician, it was the entire concept of Iranian self-determination over its natural resources. The operation was formally designated TP Ajax by the CIA. The TP designation indicated operations related to Iran in CIA cryptography. The British MI6 operation running parallel was called Operation Boot. The overall mission coordinator was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, a CIA officer with extensive Middle East experience. Roosevelt arrived in Tehran in mid-July 1953, entering the country under diplomatic cover. His operational team was small, fewer than a dozen CIA officers, but they had access to extensive networks of Iranian collaborators built up over the previous 2 years. The planning phase took place primarily between March and July 1953. CIA headquarters in Washington coordinated closely with MI6 in London. The British provided most of the intelligence about Iranian political figures because they had maintained presence in Iran for decades through the oil company. The operational plan had several phases. Phase 1 was a propaganda campaign to destabilize Mossadegh's government by portraying him as incompetent, dangerous, and aligned with communists. This involved paying Iranian journalists to write negative articles, funding opposition newspapers, and distributing pamphlets throughout Tehran. Phase 2 involved recruiting key Iranian political and military figures. The CIA and MI6 identified generals, clerics, and politicians who were opposed to Mossadegh for various reasons. Some were monarchists, loyal to the Shah. Some were religious conservatives, who disliked Mossadegh's secular policies. Some were simply corrupt and could be bought. The operational budget for bribes was approximately $1 million, a substantial amount in 1953. Phase 3 was organizing street violence that would create the appearance of chaos and instability. The CIA recruited gang leaders from Tehran's criminal underworld, paying them to organize protests that would attack government buildings and create the impression that Mossadegh had lost control of the capital. Phase 4 was the actual coup, which required military units to arrest Mossadegh and key members of his government, followed immediately by the return of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had fled the country. The Shah himself was an essential component. He had to sign royal decrees dismissing Mossadegh and appointing General Fazlollah Zahedi as the new prime minister. These decrees, called farmans in Persian, provided legal cover for the coup, making it appear constitutional. Kermit Roosevelt met with the Shah multiple times in July, convincing him to sign these documents. The Shah was reluctant, frightened of the potential consequences if the operation failed, but Roosevelt assured him of American support and eventually obtained the signatures. The synchronization of this operation was complex. It required coordinating paid mobs, military units, political allies, and propaganda efforts simultaneously. Roosevelt set up a command post in the basement of the American embassy in Tehran, maintaining communications with CIA headquarters through encrypted cables. The MI6 station in Cyprus also monitored developments and provided intelligence support. Everything was ready by August 15th. The first attempt occurred on the night of August 15th, 1953. Colonel Nematollah Nassiri, commander of the Imperial Guard, was sent to Mossadegh's residence with a small military unit to deliver the Shah's decree dismissing him from office and to place him under arrest. But Mossadegh had been warned. His intelligence services had detected unusual military movements. When Colonel Nassiri arrived at Mossadegh's home around midnight, he was met by loyalist forces who arrested him instead. The coup had failed. The Shah, monitoring the situation from his palace, immediately fled Iran with his wife, flying first to Baghdad and then to Rome. For a moment, it appeared that Operation Ajax was over. Mossadegh announced the coup attempt to the Iranian people, describing it as a monarchist plot. His supporters celebrated in the streets. CIA headquarters in Washington sent Roosevelt instructions to abort the operation and leave Iran. But Roosevelt made a decision that would change Middle Eastern history. He refused to leave. He believed the operation could still succeed. Over the next 3 days, August 16th to 18, Roosevelt activated the contingency plans. He spent more of the operational budget, paying larger amounts to gang leaders and military officers. He intensified the propaganda campaign, flooding Tehran with rumors that Mossadegh was planning to abolish the monarchy and declare himself dictator. On August 19th, the second attempt began. This time it wasn't a quiet midnight arrest. It was orchestrated chaos. Roosevelt had paid mobs to flood into central Tehran from multiple directions. Some groups were genuinely pro-Shah, others were paid thugs, and fascinatingly, some were actually members of the Tudeh Communist Party who had been told by CIA-funded agents that they were participating in a pro-Mossadegh demonstration. The result was massive street violence. Different groups clashed with each other. Buildings were burned. The security forces were overwhelmed. And in the middle of this chaos, military units loyal to General Zahedi began moving. Tank units rolled through the streets. Soldiers secured key government buildings. Radio stations were captured. By mid-afternoon on August 19th, General Zahedi's forces surrounded Mossadegh's residence. A 9-hour battle ensued. Mossadegh's guards fought back. Bullets shattered windows. Artillery damaged the building's facade, but eventually, overwhelmed and outgunned, the remaining loyalists surrendered. Mossadegh himself managed to escape over a back wall, but he turned himself in to military authorities the following day, unwilling to see more bloodshed. By the evening of August 19th, General Zahedi was in control of Tehran. He went on national radio and announced that he was the new prime minister, appointed by royal decree. The Shah, receiving news of the success in Rome, immediately flew back to Tehran. The operation was complete. The entire sequence, from initial failure to final success, had taken just 4 days, and the genius of it, from an operational perspective, was that it appeared to most Iranians as an internal political struggle. Yes, there were rumors of foreign involvement, but the CIA and MI6 had maintained such careful operational security that there was no definitive proof. The coup looked like a victory of monarchist and military forces over an unpopular prime minister, exactly as Roosevelt had designed it. The immediate aftermath saw systematic suppression of Mossadegh's supporters. Military tribunals were established. Political parties that had backed Mossadegh were banned. The Tudeh Communist Party was crushed entirely, its leadership arrested or executed. Mossadegh himself was tried for treason in a military court. The trial was theatrical, designed to justify the coup retroactively. He was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by house arrest for the remainder of his life. He died in 1967, never having left his village home after his release. The oil question was resolved exactly as the British and Americans wanted. In 1954, a new consortium agreement was signed. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, renamed British Petroleum, BP, retained 40% of Iranian oil revenues. American companies received 40%. The remaining 20% was divided among smaller European companies. Iran received better financial terms than under the old arrangement, but the principle of nationalization was dead. The Shah, restored to power by foreign intelligence agencies, never forgot that his throne rested on American support. For the next 25 years, he ruled with increasing authoritarianism, knowing that Washington valued stability over democracy. His secret police, SAVAK, became one of the most brutal intelligence services in the Middle East, trained and equipped by the CIA. Thousands of Iranians were imprisoned, tortured, or killed for opposing the regime. The investigation into foreign involvement began almost immediately, but it faced insurmountable obstacles. Journalists and scholars suspected CIA involvement, but the American government denied everything. Official documents remained classified. Kermit Roosevelt wrote a memoir, Counter-Coup, published in 1979, which described the operation in detail, but the U.S. government refused to acknowledge its authenticity. It wasn't until August 2013, 60 years after the coup, that the CIA officially released documents confirming American involvement in Operation Ajax. The National Security Archive at George Washington University obtained the documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. The declassified materials included operational plans, budget documents, and Roosevelt's own account written for CIA internal review. The documents confirmed everything: the propaganda campaign, the bribes, the coordination with MI6, the organization of street violence. Reading these documents today is surreal because they describe regime change with the clinical precision of a corporate project plan. There are spreadsheets listing payments to Iranian agents. There are propaganda guidelines explaining which themes to emphasize in fake news articles. There are contingency plans for different scenarios. It's the bureaucratization of overthrowing a democracy. The international reaction to the declassification was significant but not surprising. In Iran, the documents confirmed what many had believed for decades. The operation became a central element of the Iranian narrative about Western imperialism. Iranian leaders, both under the Shah and later under the Islamic Republic, pointed to Ajax as proof that Western powers would never respect Iranian sovereignty. The operation became a powerful recruiting tool for anti-American sentiment. Stop for a second. I need to ask you something that maybe nobody has ever asked before. Have you ever felt that deep unease, like the world they showed you was just an edited version of reality? Like there's a deeper layer of truth that only some people have access to? I know you feel this because people like us, we simply can't accept superficial answers. And I want you to know something. That feeling doesn't make you paranoid or conspiratorial. It makes you someone who still has the courage to question. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment when you realized that the world of international politics isn't what it seems? It could be a news story that didn't add up, an event that was explained too conveniently, or just an intuition you could never explain. Write this: my awakening was when, and complete it with your experience. Your story might be exactly what another person needs to hear to understand they're not alone in this journey of seeking truth. Sometimes, knowing we're not the only ones questioning is the first step to finding the real answers. Now let's continue unraveling how this operation really happened and what it means for understanding power today. Let's talk about what Operation Ajax revealed about state capabilities and the nature of modern sovereignty. First, it demonstrated that regime change operations could be executed with relatively small teams and modest budgets if the planning was sophisticated enough. The entire operation cost approximately $1 million. Compare that to military interventions, which cost billions. From a cost-benefit analysis perspective, covert operations were incredibly efficient. This realization shaped American foreign policy for decades. Between 1953 and 1973, the CIA attempted or succeeded in regime change operations in Guatemala, Congo, Indonesia, Brazil, Chile, and numerous other countries. Ajax provided the template. Second, the operation revealed the power of information warfare before the digital age. The propaganda component of Ajax was arguably more important than the military component. By controlling the narrative, By flooding Tehran with carefully crafted messages, the CIA was able to manipulate public perception of Mossadegh. They turned a popular prime minister into a figure that significant portions of the population viewed as dangerous. This was psychological warfare at its most effective. Today, we see the same techniques employed on digital platforms, but the principle remains identical. Control the narrative, and you control reality. Third, Ajax demonstrated that democratic governments could be more vulnerable to covert operations than authoritarian ones. Mossadegh operated within legal and constitutional frameworks. He respected parliamentary processes. He allowed opposition parties to function. These democratic norms became vulnerabilities that the CIA exploited. In contrast, authoritarian regimes, which control media and suppress opposition preemptively, are harder to destabilize through information warfare. This creates a perverse incentive structure where democracy itself becomes a security risk from the perspective of intelligence agencies. Fourth, the operation showed the importance of local collaborators. The CIA and MI6 couldn't have succeeded without Iranians willing to participate. Some were motivated by ideology, supporting the monarchy or opposing secular nationalism. Others were motivated by money, selling their political influence for cash payments. Still others were motivated by personal grievances against Mossadegh or his allies. The ability to identify and recruit these collaborators was the operational core of Ajax. Intelligence officers call this building assets, but it's more accurately described as buying betrayal. Fifth, Ajax revealed that plausible deniability was possible even in complex operations. For 60 years, the U.S. government maintained official deniability. Presidents, secretaries of state, CIA directors all denied American involvement when asked directly. This wasn't incompetence or lack of evidence on the part of journalists and historians. It was successful operational security combined with government discipline in maintaining secrecy. Documents were classified at the highest levels. Participants were forbidden from discussing the operation publicly. When Kermit Roosevelt's memoir was published, the CIA neither confirmed nor denied its accuracy, maintaining strategic ambiguity. This demonstrated that even in democracies with free press and freedom of information laws, governments could keep secrets for generations if they were determined enough. The long-term consequence of Operation Ajax extended far beyond 1953. The most significant consequence was the 1979 Islamic Revolution. When Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran in February 1979, ending 25 years of the Shah's rule, one of the central themes of revolutionary propaganda was the 1953 coup. The revolutionaries correctly identified that the Shah had been restored by American intelligence and had governed as an American client for a quarter century. This wasn't conspiracy theory, it was documented history. The revolution, therefore, was framed not just as opposition to the Shah personally, but as opposition to American imperial control over Iran. The seizure of the American embassy in Tehran in November 1979, holding 52 Americans hostage for 444 days, was directly connected to the legacy of Ajax. The students who occupied the embassy called it a den of espionage, claiming it was the same location from which the 1953 coup had been coordinated. They were substantially correct. The basement of that embassy had indeed served as Kermit Roosevelt's command post. The hostage crisis poisoned American-Iranian relations for the next 4 decades and continues to define the relationship today. Another consequence was the impact on American credibility regarding democracy promotion. After Ajax, when American presidents spoke about supporting democracy and self-determination, their words were met with skepticism throughout the developing world. How could America claim to support democracy when it had overthrown a democratically elected government? This credibility gap became a permanent feature of American foreign policy. Every subsequent intervention, whether genuinely motivated by democratic ideals or not, was viewed through the lens of Ajax. The operation also influenced how other countries approached nationalization of their natural resources. Leaders in oil-producing countries observed what happened to Mossadegh and drew conclusions. Some became more cautious about nationalizing too quickly. Others, like Libya's Muammar Gaddafi in 1969, nationalized their oil but simultaneously built robust security services to prevent foreign interference. The legacy of Ajax taught the world that economic nationalism required defensive intelligence capabilities. For the intelligence community itself, Ajax had mixed impacts. On one hand, it was viewed as a tremendous success, proving that sophisticated covert operations could achieve strategic objectives. It elevated the CIA's status within the American national security establishment. Kermit Roosevelt became a legend within the agency. On the other hand, Ajax contributed to a culture of overconfidence. If it was possible to overthrow a government in Tehran with $1 million and a small team, what else was possible? This attitude contributed to subsequent disasters, particularly in Cuba, with the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, where the CIA vastly overestimated its capabilities and underestimated the strength of Castro's government. The operation also exposed the fundamental tension in intelligence work between short-term success and long-term consequences. In 1953, Ajax looked brilliant. It secured Western access to Iranian oil, prevented potential Soviet influence in Iran, and strengthened an allied government. But by 1979, those gains had not only disappeared, but reversed catastrophically. The Islamic Republic that replaced the Shah was far more hostile to American interests than Mosaddegh had ever been. Mosaddegh was a secular nationalist who wanted fair compensation for Iranian oil. He was willing to negotiate with the West. He opposed communism. In contrast, the Islamic Republic viewed America as a civilizational enemy and actively worked to expel American influence from the entire Middle East. Intelligence agencies, by nature, focus on immediate threats and opportunities. They operate on budgets approved annually. They report to political leaders who think in terms of election cycles. This institutional structure makes it almost impossible for intelligence services to adequately weight long-term consequences. Ajax is the perfect case study in how an operation can be tactically brilliant and strategically disastrous. What Operation Ajax ultimately reveals is something deeply uncomfortable about modern international relations. Sovereignty, in the traditional sense of states controlling their own territory and making independent decisions, is largely fictional for smaller nations. When a country's decisions conflict with the interests of major powers, especially regarding strategic resources, that country's sovereignty becomes negotiable. The mechanisms might be economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, or covert operations, but the result is the same. The weaker country's government is changed until it aligns with the interests of stronger powers. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's documented policy, visible in declassified documents from multiple governments over decades. The phrase national interest is used to justify these interventions, but it's worth examining what that phrase actually means. In the case of Ajax, the national interest wasn't American security in any defensive sense. The Soviet Union wasn't threatening to invade Iran. The Communist Tudeh Party was not about to seize power. The threat was economic. American and British oil companies might lose access to Iranian oil or might have to pay significantly more for it. That economic interest was classified as a national security interest, which then justified an intelligence operation to overthrow a democratic government. This pattern repeats across history, and when we see covert operations, we should ask what economic interests are at stake and who benefits financially from the outcome. Another uncomfortable truth is that these operations continue. Ajax happened 70 years ago, and we only know the details because of declassification. But covert operations didn't stop in 1953. They evolved, became more sophisticated, learned from past mistakes. Current operations won't be declassified for decades, meaning our understanding of contemporary international relations is necessarily incomplete. We see events unfold, governments rise and fall, political movements emerge and disappear, but we can't see the intelligence operations underneath. Some of these events are genuinely organic, others are carefully managed. And we won't know which is which until the archives open in 2070 or 2080. The existence of Operation Ajax should make us question every official narrative about political change in strategically important regions. It doesn't mean everything is a CIA operation, but it means that possibility always exists and should be considered when analyzing geopolitical events. The operation also demonstrates that intelligence services operate with remarkable autonomy. Kermit Roosevelt disobeyed direct orders from CIA headquarters when he refused to abort the operation after the initial failure on August 15th. He made an independent decision to continue, risking American diplomatic relations and his own career. And it worked, so he became a hero within the agency. But imagine if it had failed. Imagine if Mossadegh had survived the second coup attempt, exposed American involvement, and aligned Iran with the Soviet Union as a result. Roosevelt would have been blamed for a catastrophic failure. The point is that individual intelligence officers sometimes make decisions that affect the fate of nations based on their personal judgment in the moment. This is troubling because these individuals aren't elected, aren't publicly accountable, and operate in secrecy. Democratic oversight of intelligence agencies is incredibly difficult because the activities being overseen are classified. Congressional intelligence committees review operations after the fact, but they can't monitor every decision made by officers in the field. This creates space for actions that wouldn't be approved if they were subjected to public scrutiny. If you made it this far, it's because, like me, you're fascinated by the secrets governments prefer to keep hidden. And look, this isn't just curiosity. It's a need to understand the real world behind the official curtains. I created this channel exactly for people like you who feel they deserve to know the truth about how power really works. Here you'll find stories that never make it to the news, operations that have been erased from official records, and deep analyses about the methods that shape our geopolitical reality. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell because every week I bring exclusive investigations about the world of international intelligence. And look, it's not just entertainment, it's knowledge that will change your perspective on world politics forever. Come be part of this community of people who won't settle for superficial versions of the facts. Liking the video also helps the channel grow and continue bringing this content you can't find anywhere else. Until the next revelation.